hardly anyone of our politicians, hardly anyone understand. So this is one, when I started politics 23 years ago, this was my vision. Now I'll explain to you what were the characteristics. A welfare state. A state has, it was a humane state. The Prophet set up the first welfare state of the poor people. The state had rule of law. Everyone was equal. Did not matter what religion you had. So I often quote this, that one of the most revered figures in Islam was the fourth Khalifa of the state of Medina. He lost a case against a Jewish citizen. So it showed two things. One, there was rule of law, that even the head of state was not above law. Secondly, the minorities were equal citizens. They had equal rights. And of course, our Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he also, he signed covenants with the Jews, with the Christians at the time. There's a famous a covenant he signed with St. Catherine's Church, which I believe still exists, where he pledged to protect the places of worship of Christians till the day of judgment. So it was a state that gave rights to all religions as equal citizens. Then the Prophet's famous last sermon, where he said, all of us are children of Adam. So all of us are equal, whatever the color of our skin. And then it was revolution at the time when women were given rights, right to property. And the famous, the line that man has rights over woman as a woman has rights over man. Slavery, the whole society is dependent upon slavery. So releasing a slave was considered one of the highest deeds a man could do, a person could do. But then, since the whole society depended upon slavery, they were ordered that the slaves should be treated as family members. And because of that tradition, in Muslim world, you had slave kings, slave dynasties. In India, there was a slave dynasty. The Mamluks in Egypt were slaves who became kings. What was for us, for Pakistan, you know, when I look at my own country, we moved so far away from the ideal that was what Pakistan should have been. It was the only state that was created in the name of Islam. And we moved, we became exactly the opposite, a society where the powerful had one law and the weak were from a different, in fact, were out of the law. Most of the people don't have access to justice. So hence, the cornerstone of a society is rule of law. So therefore, I call my movement for justice. And I believe that rule of law is the fundamental thing which differentiates a civilized society from one which is not civilized. When we took power, 13 months, a deed a man could do, a person could do. But then, since the whole society depended upon slavery, they were ordered that the slaves should be treated as family members. And because of that tradition, in Muslim world, you had slave kings, slave dynasties. In India, there was a slave dynasty. The Mamluks in Egypt were slaves who became kings. What was for us, for Pakistan, you know, when I look at my own country, we moved so far away from the ideal that was what Pakistan should have been. It was the only state that was created in the name of Islam. And we moved, we became exactly the opposite, a society where the powerful had one law and the weak were from a different, in fact, were out of the law. Most of the people don't have access to justice. So hence, the cornerstone of a society is rule of law. So therefore, I call my movement for justice. And I believe that rule of law is the fundamental thing which differentiates a civilized society from one which is not civilized. When we took power 13 months ago, the biggest problem we faced was our current account deficit. We inherited two of the biggest deficits, the current account and the fiscal deficit. And in order to fix that, we had to make reforms. The reason why you have a deficit is because your system is not functional. The fact that you are spending more than you are earning means that there is a fundamental problem in your economy. So we started changing that. And I'm proud to say that after probably one of the most difficult 1 year in my life, finally I can say that there has been a change where we have brought down that current account deficit, which is the fundamental thing. No matter how much, even if your economy is growing, if your current account is in a deficit, if that is not balanced, you're always going to be in trouble because your currency is going to be hit. And once your currency loses value, everything, investment stops, inflation goes up, and of course it raises poverty. So this is the one big achievement I can say. We have brought down the deficit almost by 70% in 1 year. The other problems we face, of course, the biggest problem is fixing the institutions. You can destroy an institution very quickly, but to fix the institution does take time. So the one institution we are trying to fix is our FBR, which is the agency that collects taxes. Problem Pakistan has a very low tax GDP ratio. So fixing that, the tax system has been the biggest challenge. And I'm again proud to say that the last 2 months, we have collected the highest tax ever, despite the fact that our economy still not got moving because of the restructuring. The external challenges, obviously, the most important thing for anyone who assumes power is to reduce poverty. And that was from the first word go, that was the biggest goal. Now, in order to raise people out of poverty, the next most important thing is to have stability. So we have the Afghanistan issue, on the other side, Iran, and then our relationship with India. So immediately we try to mend fences. Afghanistan, we have mended fences. We have very good interaction with the Afghan government. With Iran, we hope to play a big part. I have, met the Iranian president. Of course, President Trump also asked me if we can play a part. I have also Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman that we should play a part in reducing the tensions. We're trying our best. It's quite a complex issue, but we will try our best. I don't know how far we'll be successful. Problem came with India. The moment I was elected, I reached out to the Indian Prime Minister, offered that, it's time to reset our relationship. The problems in both countries are poverty. Poverty is the biggest issue, and unemployment. And then climate change. Climate change, the global warming is having the biggest impact in the Indo-Ganges plain. The Indus and Ganges plain are most vulnerable to climate change because 80% of our water comes from the mountains, the Himalayas and the Karakoram and the Hindu Kush ranges. Now our glaciers are melting at a much faster rate. 80% of the water in our rivers is from the glaciers. So I reached out and I felt that, time to move on, have a relationship based on trust. In any case, when my party came to power, we had taken a decision. In fact, all parties had taken a decision in 2014. It wasn't implemented. That the legacy of the 80s, where we had militant groups which after the end of the Afghan Jihad, the groups that still existed, we had decided that the state will no longer allow any armed militia in Pakistan. So we already had taken steps, and we've almost disarmed all the groups, and we invited observers also if they wanted to see. So the idea was that as the state will not allow any, because Pakistan had suffered because of the militias. Karachi had suffered. So I told the Indian Prime Minister that, look, we've taken the steps. Let's have a relationship based on trust. We didn't get it very far. And then we assumed that it's because of the Indian elections and it's the BJP posture of being a nationalist, ultra-nationalist party. Maybe that's why. So we waited. Then after the elections, when we tried to resume talks, again, there was this brick wall we came up against. In fact, we found out that India was trying to push us in the blacklist of FATF, which would have meant bankruptcy for Pakistan. And then we realized that there was something more. We couldn't understand that there was no response from India, and we felt there was an agenda. And that, of course, was revealed on 5th of August, when India unilaterally revoked Article 370, the special status of Kashmir, and since then has basically laid siege, put a curfew on 8 million people in Kashmir. My main reason for coming here on this United Nations General Assembly is because I feel that the world should realize this is a serious situation developing. This is just the beginning. The fact that 8 million people for almost 3 days now are under siege. It's dangerous because whenever the siege lifts, I fear bloodshed. And when there's bloodshed, there will be consequences, repercussions, which will go much further outside Kashmir. It will also raise tensions between Pakistan and India, as happened when there was in February, there was a 20-year-old Kashmiri boy, according to his parents, got radicalized by the security forces. He blew himself up. And India blamed us and bombed us. And then also it could have got out of hand, but we immediately returned the pilot. I fear that more of that will happen. Once the curfew is lifted, things will get from bad to worse. I fear that this will have impact not just in Kashmir. There are 180 million Muslims in India. This is going to have a huge impact there. Then, in Pakistan, we have taken all these steps to to control all these organizations, disband them, taken over their seminaries. So what happens as this thing gets from bad to worse? Things will deteriorate even in our own country. So it's very important for the world community, the United Nations, to take action now, before things go out. And that really was the purpose of my visit. And I hope I've tried to explain things to all the leaders, world leaders I've met. I hope to speak on this tomorrow. And I hope that the world community acts on this. Unfortunately, I found that the material is so much more important than the human. And this is, of course, reflected in the world community's attitude to climate change. But this eventually could have far-reaching consequences. And therefore, as I said, I hope that by the time I leave, I hope to meet the UN Secretary General tomorrow, and I hope to convince him. But apart from that, can I say that I feel very optimistic. In my very difficult first year, I feel that the country has tremendous potential. We have, even I, before that, didn't realize that we are sitting on mineral wealth, copper, one of the most fertile agricultural land, a young population. We've opened up Pakistan for tourism. First time we have 70 countries can get visas at the airport in Pakistan. We have made it easier for tourists to go all over, because previously there were problems. Because of the war on terror, there were a lot of problems. So tourists couldn't travel as much. And we have also, as far as religious tourism goes, we have opened up shrines that were important to the Hindu religion, to the Sikh religion, Kartarpur especially, and Buddhism. The whole of North Pakistan was center of Buddhism. So we are opening up our country now for travel, for investors. We have great interest in people now as the economy has stabilized now. We have a lot of people interested in investment in our country. All now we need is stability, peace. And hence, again, this development in Kashmir is very important for us, that it does not go from bad to worse from where it is now. Thank you.
Here. Do I need this? We're fine. Well, Mr. Prime Minister, I want to thank you. You've covered a lot of territory here, and one thing that struck me in my travels throughout Pakistan, I've had 3 posts that have brought me extensively through Pakistan. One was as Deputy U.S. Trade Representative, where we were putting forward the idea of a free trade agreement with Pakistan after 9/11. We're in a different era now. And another was as Condi Rice's economic deputy, and I was in Pakistan the day after the earthquake, and she asked me to coordinate U.S. response, which brought me up through the Himalaya region and up through the earthquake zone. And then I headed the United Nations World Food Program and went throughout the Indus Valley and throughout Swat and Baluchistan. And what struck me is some of what you mentioned here, the absolute beauty of Pakistan. And it was called the Little Switzerland. And tourists would go there and they'd go camping and skiing and hiking in the Great Mountains. And it made me wonder, particularly in Swat, where so many religions and faiths were represented, where that turning point came in history. And I just wonder if you could touch a little bit more on that, on the realization and how we get back to that place of the really unparalleled hospitality that I met throughout Pakistan in my work.
Well, our tourism really suffered after 9/11, because suddenly Pakistan became right in the eye of the storm. The war on terror took a big toll on Pakistan. Tourism finished. Areas became no-go areas for tourists, especially the northwest part of Pakistan. And the entire border strip between the tribal areas between Afghanistan and Pakistan, there was, it just fell into complete turmoil. So that's when tourism nosedived in Pakistan. So what we are trying to do now is, by opening up the visa regime so that it's easy. Before, it was very difficult to get Pakistani visa, when we discovered. Secondly, domestic tourism in Pakistan has taken off. And that's because of the mobile phone. People go somewhere, they take a picture, put it on their Facebook, and then everyone arrives there. And it is 3 years ago when I went to the northern areas, I found that there was no place. All hotels were booked. And all of them, Pakistan had not advertised anything, but it was people going there.
वज़ीर आज़म इमरान खान इस वक्त न्यूयॉर्क में मौजूद हैं और एशियाई सोसाइटी से खिताब कर रहे थे। उन्होंने कहा कि हुकूमत का पहला साल मेरी ज़िंदगी का सबसे मुश्किल तरीन साल था। ऐसी फलाही रियासत बनाना चाहता हूँ जिसमें गरीबों की मदद की जाए। फलाही रियासत का क़याम मेरी अव्वलीन तरजीह है। मेरा पाकिस्तान के लिए वही विजन है जो बानियाने पाकिस्तान का विजन था।